Beneath the Well of Brass. As long as you've known the flame-licked caves and suffocating caverns, they have been forbidden to your people. But 3 days ago, the Black King and his brigands overran your small hamlet, taking friends and family hostage. His demands are as simple as they are impossible. Venture into the burning caverns and return with the secret of eternal life. Now standing before the seething fissure, armed with only your simple tools and desperate courage, you must accomplish what an army of blackguards cannot. The Well of Brass awaits. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to No Fun Allowed, and today we're going to be reviewing Beneath the Well of Brass, a 0th level adventure for DCC. This one is a pretty unique one in that right from the get-go, your players are being pressed into service, which is interesting. If you look at a lot of the other level 0 adventures, a lot of them pertain to your players having a drive for that adventure. This one is definitely right from the get-go is, hey, you're getting to work, it's time to go. Now, right then and there, that does present some sorts of issues. If you have combative players, then they may try and rebel. Or if you have players that don't want to work for people because they just don't like doing that, then there may be some friction there. But that's kind of the fun of this adventure. It actually does detail out some information about how your players can respond to that. Right from the get-go, they get told, hey, your friends and family are being held hostage. You need to go into this cave. And there is the adventure. So kicking things off here, we can see some great inside art here, and this actually is a part of the adventure. Your players can discover this magical tome on some dead guy's body, and maybe that magical tome will prove useful later on. Now, the player start for this one is a little bit wordy, I am going to say. Right from the get-go, you've got to lay out this big old thing about this brigand prince named the Black King, who has taken over the nearby hamlet, and you have to go through this whole procedure of saying, oh yeah, he appeared, and yeah, you've got all these people hostage, and you need to go in there, and you need to retrieve something, and if you don't retrieve that special something, then we're just going to kill them. And right there at the very end it says they all die. So it's very menacing, very brutal, very dark, but it's a great motivator to get people into this cave. And as mentioned before, the thing I like about this adventure is, as we're looking at this map actually seems pretty linear, all things considered, but the fact that your players right from the get-go have a choice as to how they operate and how they deal with this terrible villain who's taken over the nearby town and all, like, that's a great thing. So right from the get-go, your players go into this Devil's Maw, and they must go down the Well of Brass, which is terrifying because basically this place is constantly spouting out a whole bunch of flames and a whole bunch of gases, and people could get burned. If they walk around with a torch, they could get themselves burned, or they might be able to expel all the gases and not have to worry about that. So that's a great little thing there. Once your players make their way inside of the Well of Brass, they're in Area 1-3, then they get to start exploring around. And actually, they do get some context clues about how to avoid some of the gases, because right when they go to Area 1-3, they can see a whole bunch of torches on the ground. But right then and there, we get to start exploring. Now, of course, as we're looking at the map, it's not terribly too complex of a location here. We see that there's a little bit of little this way, a little that way there. In Area 1-4, your players can find the little magical book. But the real interesting part there is once your players go to Area 1-5, there inside they'll see a whole bunch of dancing flames, which are actually real elementals, and they will conflagate anybody and they'll combine, and it adds a really fun, unique combat encounter where it starts off with a whole bunch of little elementals, but if the combat persists, then they just get bigger and bigger and hit for harder. And actually what I really like about that mechanic in particular is right from the get-go, you're only rolling a d10 for attacks, but as more combine together, then you start rolling higher and higher dice. That is really cool. That really dictates, hey, you either take them out early or you run away. However it is you want to deal with it, you deal with it. So I really like that encounter. In Area 1-6, that is a really cool one. Your players can, one person in particular, can become a paladin of hell, and they get a cool hellish sword, and then they get all these special powers and stuff, and it's a really powerful ability. But in order to become a paladin of hell, you have to make a super high DC save, and a lot of people are going to die in the process potentially. But if someone does succeed, they get a tremendously awesome sword, and it's freaking dope. It's so cool. Like right there, that's gonna lead to awesome future adventures if that PC survives and they're a paladin of hell, you know. And it also actually dictates that if someone takes over the sword, then they can as well, you know, make that deal, but only if the previous person has died or whatever. So that's pretty cool. In Area 1-7, your players will find a strange wheel, and there they'll begin to be able to find out some context clues about what's going on in this cave, as well as they can also get some potential buffs or some nerfs or even death from this wheel. And another big part of this adventure here is in Area 1-8, your players can essentially leave this cave. And what's really unique about this encounter is your players essentially have the choice. Do they want to go through the Well of Brass and discover the secret to immortality and thus give it to the Black King, or are they willing to dip? I've ran this multiple times. I've actually had it where some groups continue to press on and other groups decide to just dip because they didn't want any more people to die, which I think is, you know, pretty realistic, right? If you threw a whole bunch of peasants down a well and a whole bunch of them are dying left and right, then it makes sense that some of them would be scared and run away, even if it meant that their friends and family would be killed. But other people would be a bit more adventurous, and I think it's a really great reward for all those adventurous people. Now in Area 1-9, they go up these steps, and then to Area 1-10, they go to this large pentagram room, and it's freaking gnarly. It's one of the most deadliest encounters in all 0th level play, because if your players do not successfully navigate this sort of puzzle or trap or whatever it is you want to call it, then basically more and more shades are going to start erupting from the earth. And these shades are going to eventually number in the hundreds if they do not do this appropriately. And that's really, really cool. You can really evoke this sense of dread if your players are inside of this pentagram and they set things up correctly, then no one's dying. But then there's, you know, a dozen shades and then a couple dozen and then eventually hundreds of shades just gnawing at this invisible wall in front of them. All the meanwhile, anybody who's too scared to be inside of the pentagram, which inevitably people are going to, every single group is always going to have someone that says, oh, I don't want to be in the pentagram when we start doing the thing. And then, of course, they're going to get killed because if they're outside of the pentagram, then they're going to get attacked by all the shades. So pretty gnarly and fun little encounter there. Eventually, your players will activate this door, and there they'll be able to go and see this beautiful, beautiful spread. There they'll be able to open up a door that leads to the Plain of Brass, or the City of Brass. And like that's just really cool. Your players are, you know, level 0 peasants, they're nobodies, but all of a sudden, boom, they see that there is far more to this world. That's so freaking cool. That's so epic. And once again, it does lead to future adventures. Maybe your players do want to come back to this plane and to this city and do some dealings there. But maybe they don't. Who knows, right? Once your players find themselves in this location, and there they can snoop around, and if they are unfortunate, then they run into some Ifrit champions, which are going to totally kill them because Ifrits are super duper strong. I guess it's technically possible that your players can overcome the Ifrit, but not very likely. But more than likely what's going to happen is your players are going to go to that little side area there in Area 112, and there they can find a Phoenix Egg. And if your players grab this Phoenix Egg and bring it back to the Black King, then they can save their allies. Now, some people may be thinking, okay, what if, you know, this guy's a brigand, why would he keep his word? Well, fortunately, if your players bring back this egg, then the Black King's going to touch it, and then all of a sudden de-age. And he's going to de-age right in front of everybody. He's going to be, you know, like, he's an old guy, and then he becomes a little bit younger, and then a little bit younger. And then eventually, there's like a cool little scene where basically he becomes like a child, and then a baby, and then just disappears out of existence. And then all the other brigands flee. Really, really cool, right? And, of course, that's just one way to end this. Another way this adventure could end could be your players just running away. Another way this adventure could end could be your players getting a whole bunch of loot and items and stuff and thinking to themselves, hey, let's just attack the Black King, and maybe they deal with it that way. There's a lot of different ways to approach this somewhat linear scenario, and I absolutely dig that. Alrighty, time for me to give my 5 stars of review. As a friendly reminder, I give 5 stars out for the combat, for the exploration, and for the roleplay. 1 being the worst, 5 being the best. But as a friendly reminder, even if an adventure doesn't get a high score, it doesn't mean that it's a bad adventure. It just means it's lacking in a certain element, which is perfectly fine. If you want an exploration adventure and it doesn't have any roleplay in it, then who cares if it, has a bad roleplay score, right? So kicking things off here with exploration, I'm just going to give it a solid 3 out of 5 for the exploration. There really isn't too many variables in regards of where you're exploring. You can basically decide if you want to explore everything or not. It doesn't take too much. But mind you, the exploration specifically to get to what I think is one of the cooler portions of this, the whole sword of the Hell Paladin, that might be a little bit hard to explore because some groups might just get frightened off by all the flame little elementals floating around. But other than that, yeah, there really isn't too much in regards to the exploration here, sadly. But the parts that are there are meaningful. And if your players explore this entire complex, they can learn that they could decide to dip out of this adventure and not to deal with the Black King anymore. And I think that's actually really cool. I don't think it's cool that some groups decide to bounce out, but I like that, the option's there because it's realistic, right? Not every group is going to do it. As I mentioned before, I've had groups that run away because they've taken too many losses, and it feels realistic to not want to continue on. Now on to combat. Once again, I'm also going to give this a 3 stars because actually as written, there really is only 3 potential combats, which is one being the Flame Elementals, one being the Ifrits, and one being with the Black King and all of the Brigands. Now, the important part here is all of those combats are optional. I've ran this where no one gets into combat because they just don't want to get into combat. And as a reminder, the Ifrits are optional, getting into a fight with the Black King's optional, getting into a fight with all the Flame Elementals, those are all optional. And also the Shades, but I don't really count the Shades as a fight because, yeah, they can take on 2 or 4 Shades as a group, but once it gets to high numbers, that's not a fight anymore. They just automatically lose, right? So the combat is all optional, and I like that it's all optional, but it doesn't highlight any portion of the adventure in any one way. In fact, I think the more combat you get into in this adventure in particular, I think the worse it gets for specifically the party, right? And now on to roleplay, specifically social interaction. I'm also going to give it 3 stars because, once again, the social interaction is completely optional. Maybe your players decide to not want to try and talk with the Black King and all of the Brigands. Maybe your players decide to not try and talk with the Ifrits. Not that talking to the Ifrits is going to do much anyway because they're pretty evil and they're probably just going to either, kill or capture the party or whatever, right? But the option's there, and I like that. Now, in total, that's going to give us a 9-star adventure. But I am here to tell you that, interesting enough, I think that even though this is a 9-star adventure, I think it's a pretty solid adventure. I really like it. The thing that really strikes me as really strong about this adventure is just the fact that even though it seems like a simple scenario, it can be approached so many different ways. I feel like a lot of the other adventures, in a certain portion of the scenario, your players are always going to approach it the same way, no matter what type of group that you run it for or what table you run it for. But this one is unique every single time. I've got no idea what's going to happen. Even though it looks like a simple map, even though it looks like a simple premise, it's so unique every single time. And I am here to tell you that it's one of my most favorite adventures of the 0th level lineup for DCC. I really dig it. So those are my thoughts on Beneath the Well of Brass. What are your thoughts? Have you ran this as a judge? Have you ran through this as a player? Have you not ran through this yet? What are your thoughts on this adventure? Because I absolutely dig it, and I'm curious to see what you all have to say about it. But that's going to do it from me. Thank you all for watching. Thanks for listening. And thank you to my amazing patrons. You guys are absolutely incredible. Thank you so very much. And I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.